All proportional relationships can be represented by an equation, a table, and a graph. This means that any proportional relationship that is shown in a table or a graph can be represented by an equation that's in the form y equals mx. To write the equation for a proportional relationship, the first thing we need to do is find the constant of proportionality, also called the slope. Once we have that, we can write that in the form y equals mx by writing y equals the number that was our constant of proportionality times x. Let's look at this graph. This graph shows the number of hours that you rent a canoe compared to the total cost. I can take the values that are on my graph and I can put them into a table. So I see that my first point is right here at the origin. Well, that is a point where x is equal to 0 and y is also equal to 0. I notice that I have another point right here. This point has an x value of 2, and then it has a y value of 24, so I can put that in my table as 2 and 24. My point right here has an x value of 4, and it has a y value of 48. And then this point has an x value of 8 and a y value of 96. I can see from my graph that this is a proportional relationship, and I know that because it's a straight line that goes through the origin. So to write my equation, I know that my equation is going to be in the form y equals mx, but I need to find m. We remember that to find our constant of proportionality, or our slope, we need to find the change in y over the change in x. Well, all I have to do is pick two values from my table. So if I just choose my first two, it'll be easy, especially because this one is 0. I'm going to call this x sub 1, and the y value that goes with it is y sub 1. So I'm going to call 2 x sub 2, and the y value with it is y sub 2. I'm going to plug in my formula. That formula, remember, says y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So y sub 2 is 24 and y sub 1 is 0, so this is 24 minus 0. X sub 2 is 2 and x sub 1 is 0, so this is over 2 minus 0. And then I just solve. 24 minus 0 is 24 and 2 minus 0 is 2. Well, 24 can be divided by 2. 24 divided by 2 is 12. That means that my constant of proportionality is 12. So the equation that represents this situation is y equals 12x. This means that to find the total cost of a canoe rental, which is y, I would multiply 12 times the hours, which are my x value. So I can ask myself, what would it cost to rent a canoe for 5 hours? If I want to know the cost to rent a canoe for 5 hours, I would plug in 5 for x, since x represents my hours. 12 times 5 would give me a y value of 60, so I would know that if I rented a canoe for 5 hours, it would cost $60. Let's look at this graph. This shows the number of months and the amount of money in Miguel's savings account. Well, again, we can fill out our graph. So my first point is right here at the origin. That's where x is 0 and y is also 0. My next point is right here where x is 2 and y is 30. My final point is right here where x is 4 and y is 60. I can see that this is a proportional relationship because it's a straight line that goes through the origin. So I know I can use the formula y equals mx to represent this situation. That means I need to find my change in y. Well, I notice that every time here, y is increasing by 30, so my change in y is 30. I can also do that by subtracting 30 minus 0, or 60 minus 30. Then I notice that my change in x is that my x is increasing by 2 every time. So my change in x is 2. I could have done that by subtracting 2 minus 0 or subtracting 4 minus 2. So my constant of proportionality, or my slope, is equal to 30 over 2, or 30 divided by 2, which gives me a constant of proportionality of 15. So an equation to represent this graph is y equals my constant of proportionality, which is 15, times x. This means that if I want to find the total amount in Miguel's savings account, I'm going to multiply 15 times the number of months. I can deduct from this, or deduce from this, that Miguel saves $15 in his account every month. Now let's write equations from tables. You can see from this table that I have a proportional relationship where x is equal to 1 while y is equal to 3, x is 3 while y is 9, and x is 6 while y is 18. Well, the first thing we can do is graph this relationship to see what it looks like. So my first x value is 1, so I'll go to 1 on my x-axis, and that corresponding y value is 3, so I'm going to go up to 3 on my y-axis, and I'm going to put a point. My next x value is 3, and the y value that corresponds to 3 is 9, so I'm going to go to 3, 9, and put a point. My final ordered pair is where x is 6 and y is 18. Well, I can see from looking at this that this looks like it would be a straight line. Now, I need to find the constant of proportionality if I want to write an equation that's in the form y equals mx. So I can choose 2 points and find the difference in their y values. So my y starts at 3 and goes to 9. So the change is 9 minus 3, or 6. My first x value is 1 and it goes to 3. So the change is 3 minus 1, or 2. Then I can simplify, and I know that 6 over 2 is equal to 3. So this means that the constant of proportionality for this relationship is 3. To write the equation, I'm just going to write y equals 3 times x. Now let's look at this situation. This is comparing hours to miles, and I can graph this on my graph. I know that 2 hours is traveled in 5 miles, so this would be my x values, and these would be my y values. So I'm going to go to 2 for my x, and then I'm going to go up to 5 for y. My next one is 5 and 12.5, so I'm going to go right to 5 and then up to 12.5. And I know 12.5 is right in between 12 and 13. Then I have 10 and 25, so I'm going to go right 10 and then up 25. And finally, I have 14 and 35, so I'm going to go right 14 and then up 35. Now I'm going to need to write the equation in the form y equals m times x, which means I need to find m. So if I choose 2 of my values, I'm going to do change in y, so that's 12.5 minus 5, over change in x, so that's 5 minus 2. Well, 12.5 minus 5 gives me 7.5, and 5 minus 2 gives me 3. Well, if I divide 7.5 by 3, then I get a constant of proportionality of 2.5. This means that the equation that represents this is y equals 2.5 times x. I can also take a real-world situation and I can make a table, graph, and equation from that situation. This problem says that Melissa babysits for 3 hours and earns $24. So I know from this that if she babysits 3 hours, she's going to earn $24. Well, I also know if Melissa babysits 0 hours, she's going to earn $0. Let's figure out what Melissa would earn for just 1 hour. I'm going to find the unit rate, and the unit rate is going to be found by doing y over x. Well, my y value here would be 24, and my x value would be 3. When I divide 24 by 3, I get 8. Well, y over x is the same as change in y over change in x for this situation, and this means that Melissa earns $8 per hour. That means that the constant of proportionality here is $8. I can write an equation for this by saying y equals 8x. To figure out some other points for my graph, I can plug in various y value or various x values and find the corresponding y value. So if I want to know how much Melissa earns for 7 hours, I would plug that in for x. Well, 8 times 7 would give me 56. If I want to know how much Melissa earns for 5 hours, I would plug 5 in for x. 8 times 5 would give me 40. Now I can take all of this and graph it. I know that I have a point here at the origin because if Melissa doesn't babysit, she doesn't earn money. I also know that for 3 hours, she earns $24. So I can go from 3 up to 24. Then I know that 7 hours is $56, but that goes off my graph, so I can't really put that here. And 5 hours would be $40. Well, that's off my graph, but it's not that far, so I can put a point about where that would go. I can also put other values. So I know that if Melissa works 2 hours, I would do 8 times 2, which would give me 16. So 2 hours would be $16.